I'm K.R. Davidson. Welcome to Our Nation Today, where we unpack the story behind the headlines. 2021 has started and continues to be a challenging year for many, including students. Frank Finley, the University of Calgary Student Union president, is expecting a repeat of last year, when over a third of students did not find any summer work. He says many are worried about dropping out, putting food on the table, and becoming homeless. The Canadian Alliance of Student Associations is also hearing the same message across the country. While the government says there are 150,000 jobs available through the modified Canada Summer Jobs Program, student advocates are calling for action on student loans. The call comes amid increasing concern around student debt, and some are questioning whether the significant debt load incurred by way of going to university is the best way to further their education. As always, I'm pleased to have Nathaniel Dueck, senior researcher, writer, and analyst with the News Forum with me to discuss the story behind the headlines. Okay, so we have a lot to unpack here. Challenging when we're seeing students are facing issues, not only with the pandemic, but debt load and just going to post-secondary education has been challenging overall. Yeah. What are some of the things that you're hearing on this story?
Well, I think what we're seeing, like you mentioned in the introduction there's a great deal of concern around students being able to find summer work and whether they will be able to then go back into school to pay for tuition for the next year.
Sure.
So this is affecting undergrads as well as graduate students across the board. So there's some serious concerns around that.
Yeah, it's funny. You know, my son's been handing out resumes. There's no response whatsoever because everything's shut down. And I think it's really interesting to see, you know, how does the government deal with this? We take a look, they're stating that they have the summer jobs program, but if you take a look at the summer jobs program, it's very limited in its scope. It has to accord with national and local priorities. It's not really meant to be this grandiose jobs program. It'll be interesting to see how do you merge CERB and summer jobs together to be able to have something, because I spoke to lots of employers last year who said that they couldn't hire back their employees because CERB was actually paying them a little bit more.
Right. Well, I mean, to that point, they have modified the Canada Summer Jobs Program, so it's longer now as opposed to just lasting the summer months. It's extended into next year. So there's a bit of a longer.
But the deadline was back in January.
For the employers to get their
That's right.
jobs
So,
done, right?
So the deadline was back in January. You have to accord with those priorities to be able to get that. So it seems to be really geared for a lot of non-for-profits and public sector, but for the larger private sector, especially small-based businesses, it doesn't seem like it's fitting that.
Well, and I mean, you can talk to any small business owner, and I'm pretty sure most of them don't feel that they have felt very supported through this entire pandemic time, and certainly not to the point where they're wanting to hire more staff. I mean, if you look at some of the main areas where students are hired, it's seasonal work, it's tourism, it's retail, it's all the areas that have been most affected by the pandemics and its closures.
I see all of these students working with companies that are getting online with Shopify, graphic designs, online, how to use that CERB money to be able to have Canada press forward and into that space. But let's take a look at some of the underlying concerns here. We've got tuition fees.
Right.
We've got an increase of 40%, I think, over the last decade. It keeps on going up.
Keeps on going up. Tuition keeps going up. Students, on average, are graduating with about $28,000 in debt. So we've got some $28,000.
And then you go to law school and you're leaving with $100,000.
That's right. That's just the undergraduate level. If you go into your professional programming or your master's or even your PhD, that's already a lot.
Now I know you're going to put a plug in here for trades here. So you're saying that that's the better route. So
I don't know if it's the better route, but it's certainly a valid route that I think we need to consider more often as Canadians. Is that there's a lot of you're still learning. The Red Seal program is comprehensive across Canada,
and a great need, and some great roles in that. So, and we definitely see university costs going up. We have administration costs going. It's nonstop. So, the pressures of COVID-19 affect different groups in society in different ways. In generations gone past, parents made great sacrifices to ensure their children had a proper education. So the next generation could be in a better position than the last. We are now faced with the question of whether the next generation is going to be better off than we are. Students are not only being saddled with increasing student debt, but will also be the ones that will be lifting the heavy burden of increased government spending. In addition, they are also battling with housing prices that put the market out of reach for most. This generation needs to look at questions of how to effectively implement plans to ensure that the next generation is better off than we are. and to explore the sacrifices that need to be made to do so. Stay with us. We'll be back after these messages. Welcome back to Our Nation Today. Parliament has been looking into how to protect the privacy and reputations of people who are appearing on pornography websites. The Ethics Committee has invited sexual assault victims to testify to share their experiences and recommendations for change. However, some witnesses are not happy with the way they were treated. In some cases, they say they felt re-victimized by the experience before the House of Commons committee. Advocates are calling into question whether lawmakers should be trained to take a more trauma-informed approach when interacting with vulnerable witnesses. So this is an interesting story to hear. We're coming off the heels of Bill C-3 that went through the House just months ago, where Parliament was stating that judges needed to have sensitivity training to help them deal with sexual assault victims, because the judiciary didn't have the requisite oversight, and now we're seeing parliaments being basically accused of the same thing. What's some of your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all appreciate the gravity of the situation, and certainly, I can't even imagine what those victims went through. So, I think we need to be very cautious around that, and it's surprising to me that MPs were not more cautious around that, given that this has been an issue that's been in the news for some time, and we would expect our leaders to show some level of understanding of that.
So I looked at some of the committee interactions and such, and when I looked at it, I'm seeing, okay, we're dealing with a fundamental issue at play, that committees and even the question period are used for highly partisan purposes, and you're seeing that this is coming out. I think one of the MPs was asking for a motion to be moved when they should have been putting a question to one of the victims.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing the same old, but without the context to understand that there are vulnerable people here that there should be considerations.
Right.
So, please go ahead.
I was just going to add that committees by nature are always going to be inherently political in the House. They're divided on a political basis.
But do they need to be? And I think that this is one of the questions I want to ask.
I think the main, and I think that's the right question to ask, because that is something I think a lot of Canadians are asking too. Like, why do you need to do this when you're asking these witnesses to come in? At sometimes I understand, the Whip's office will say the committee needs to address this and it needs to be done. And so the committee is moved along, and it has to take care of its own internal business. But on an issue when it's so important like this one, you would think that maybe it would be wise for governments to set aside some of those partisan plans.
That would be somewhat saying you're going to change your behaviors on a dime, and that ship doesn't turn that quickly, as you know. But we saw the same issues with MAID. People were complaining that there wasn't enough time through the committee to be able to investigate it. We're seeing the same issue. We saw the WE scandal. We saw, these very limited times to be able to ask these very important questions. And so I think that it starts to go to the root of, what is the underlying thing that can be shifted? How do we move Parliament into a place where it's actually more representative of what the people would expect from their parliamentarians?
Right. And that you mentioned C3 before with the judges. Sexual awareness training, and I think there's in the preamble, and I won't read the whole thing, and I apologize for reading a block text, but I do think it's relevant to that particular point.
You're forgiven.
Whereas parliamentarians have a responsibility to ensure that Canada's democratic institutions reflect the values and principles of Canadians and respond to their needs and concerns, whereas sexual assault proceedings have a profound effect on the reputations and lives of persons affected and present a high possibility of re-victimizing survivors of sexual assault.
Okay, so
that is what we're telling the judges. That is what Parliament told judges. But it seems like Parliament needs to tell that to itself.
Yeah, and the judiciary said we can deal with this. They put together proposals. Parliament said we need to be able to govern this, and then of course we're seeing some hypocritical behavior, some might call it, right?
Exactly, and I want to, the sexual awareness training for judges, that's a separate pile in terms of
there's no doubt greater sensitivity needs to happen.
Absolutely.
That can happen quite simply by allowing video testimonials where you're not limited, et cetera. But I think we've got a more fundamental issue that we need to take a look at. So, Adlai Stevenson once said, "A hypocrite is the kind of politician who would cut down a redwood tree, then mount the stump and make a speech for conservation." It is with great irony that Parliament is facing this issue. Just months ago, Parliament demanded that judges be supervised by Parliament because the judiciary lacked the internal processes to do so. The reality is that this story highlights something greater than the present insensitivity to these victims. It is highlighting that both question period in the House and the public-facing committees are highly partisan charades, and the arcane rules that support these displays misrepresent what Canadians expect from Parliament. It is incumbent upon the leadership in our country to effectively display that Parliament is a function of respectful debate and cooperation to solve the most important issues of our time, rather than jockeying for position. Stay with us. Welcome back to Our Nation Today. Apple is making news this week, but not for a new iPhone release. Rather, the tech giant is facing a challenge to its control over the App Store, and this is related to the popular game Fortnite. Apple collects up to a 30% fee from each download of the game. Epic Games, the maker of Fortnite, says Apple's control over the online store is anti-competitive. Apple, however, says that it is a private company and it created the App Store and it can charge what it likes. The case is creating a firestorm in the U.S. with lawmakers on both sides of the aisles alleging the company is engaging in monopoly-like practices. But what is the real impact of the monopolies and competition in the market? Nathaniel, you're the anti-competitive guru here.
Well, I think that might be a little bit of a stretch.
There you go. But so we're seeing this dominance of Apple being questioned by Fortnite. They had this brilliant ad that played on Apple's intro into the market under Steve Jobs. One of my favorite novels is 1984, so it's a play on that. It was brilliant. But we've really got this David and Goliath story going on. Fortnite thinks that it might be able to have a story that surpasses the legal argument. What's your take?
Right. Well, if you're seeing it right now, Epic Games, which makes Fortnite, among other games, is really hitting the sweet spot politically in terms of going after Apple or one of the big tech giants for what is perceived as and what it's calling to be anti-competitive behavior. Effectively arguing Apple is creating a monopoly. They can't sell enough of their game outside of the Apple Store, and it's a duopoly.
Google's got the same
exactly.
issues,
it's the
right?
Google Play Store or Play Store and Apple as well. So those two really effectively control the market. And so Epic Games is saying, look, you're charging us a 30% fee on this. This is our product. You're making hundreds of millions of dollars. Stop.
And it seemed like they set them up on this. They were prepared. They
had the ad rolled out, right? So it was all good on that front. But what you're seeing also, and this is why I said political sweet spot, because you're seeing normally a divided partisan Congress coming together and saying, hey, actually, guess what? This is very close to this is very monopoly-like.
Well, basically, Senator Klobuchar said that the Apple Store was literally a monopoly. You're seeing both Democrats and Republicans are coming alongside this. And I think everybody's hoping that this judge is going to make the tough decisions that maybe the politicians haven't made in the past.
And from what I've been reading, that's very much a bit of a gamble because anti-competitive law or competition law or antitrust law in the U.S. is very much up to the judge and not necessarily as certain as we might want it to be.
Well, and since Ronald Reagan, there's been a relaxation of anti-competition law in the states, and they basically said that your verdict is as predictable as what the judge is having for breakfast that morning.
That was exactly that was I read that.
And so we don't know where it is, but the states isn't alone in this. Canada deals with these issues as well. Mm-hmm. We've got a great Canadian company, Shopify, coming up, but the reality is our markets and our industries are largely controlled. The big five banks, telecom is by the big three, and so we're in the same dynamic here in Canada.
Well, actually, we're not quite in the same. We're less. We are less competitive.
Don't say we're
than
worse.
The States.
Yeah,
we are
okay.
in this regard, according to So it's a concern for a lot of people. And certainly the Commissioner for Competition, which is a great title just to have in and of itself. But with a recent report from 2008 saying competition is vital to the economy, Canada's not doing enough. In 2019, the Commissioner for Competition said, guess what? We're still in the same boat. We don't have enough competition here.
And there's been a real question economically of where we are with our GDP output and everything because our productivity ratios are out. But if we're not having the incubation in place, everything's locked up in those hands, then we're going to see that that's going to continually be stymied.
Right. And I mean, this is the concern. I mean, we're seeing the ease of business falling in this country from 2006, where we were fourth to 22nd now in 2019.
Again, I'm going to put my plug in. I think some of the serve needs to get directed to small business innovation, but there we go. Apple and other Goliaths like Google, Facebook, and Amazon have parlayed their success into dominance in their given areas, and this has given pause for many to question whether the people and the governments wish to cede control of aspects of society to mega corporations that transcend the reach of most countries. While Apple seems to have the legal argument behind them, Fortnite has a David and Goliath story. And in this case, their aim may actually strike at a vulnerability of Apple's strength. This story surfaces a point of self-reflection for Canadians to see whether we need to dig deeper into considering whether monopolization in Canadian industry is stifling our innovation and productivity. Stay with us. We'll be back after these messages with our last segment. Welcome back to Our Nation Today. China and the Philippines are awash in a war of words over a disputed shoal in the South China Sea. In a Twitter outburst, the Philippines Foreign Secretary demanded that the Chinese government withdraw its Coast Guard vessels from the Scarborough Shoal. The Philippines says China has no law enforcement rights in what it calls the West Philippine Sea, yet the standoff is continuing. This is in spite of an international tribunal ruling in 2016 that found the Chinese government had no right to the area. China both refused to participate and recognize the ruling and has militarized islands in the area. The move is a continuation of tensions between China and the countries allied with the U.S. in the region disputing China's aggressive claims. Okay, so lots to unpack with this one. Let's just take a look at we've got the Philippines government here. I actually think that there's a bit of friction within their own government. We've got the foreign secretary that is putting out tweets with expletives in it against China, but the president is actually very friendly with China.
This highlights the issue, I think, that is driving through the Philippines right now at this time. I mean, the foreign secretary has since apologized for his tweets, but only on a personal level to his counterpart.
Sure.
Saying if he felt offended,
I think he has a tendency of using expletives.
He has, and indeed, he's in some cases seen to follow the president's lead on that front. But anyway, President Rodrigo Duterte has a very solid relationship with China that he is keen on growing, and it's something that he has tried to develop. So he's trying to talk this whole thing down. He's saying if we go to war with China, he's already bringing it to that point. If we go to war with China over what the Philippines calls the West Philippine Sea, commonly referred to as the South China Sea, we will lose in the Philippines. So let's not do that.
But it's interesting because the Philippines have tacked away from their friendship with the U.S. in recent years and have drawn closer to China. But when you take a look at some of these territorial boundaries you're seeing from China, it's going right up to the shore of all of the countries in the region.
This is what China's calling its historic right.
It's pre-1930, they say.
According to a 2016 ruling, according to the law of the sea, they don't have that historic right.
Correct.
They ruled that the islands are not habitable, so this is actually about sea itself. It's not about territory, even though China's in some ways trying to make it about territory by building some of these islands around. However, the ruling from 2016 said in this area of the West Philippine Sea, this is the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. It is where they can fish. China's Coast Guard legally shouldn't be there.
Why does this matter to Canadians? You and I both like talking about international issues, exactly. But why does this matter to Canadians?
Well, there's a Chatham House report that I read saying this sort of action really, really works to undermine the international rules-based order, especially in the law of the sea. We have the world's longest coastline. Anything that infringes upon that is a big issue, especially when we look at our North and our Arctic. and our other seas. We've had these issues before.
And international law is murky at times.
Right.
But the one area where it's not murky is on the law of the sea. It's well established. People don't really have to guess much what's happening in that area, and you see in this. So let's take a look at Canada. We've had our own disputes with Russia over boundaries in the Arctic.
Spain, France.
Well, now we're
Denmark.
Okay, no.
US,
Okay, if you want to play that, let's go back to
sure.
because let's go back to Alaska, because that's actually an interesting point here. But when you take a look at these big aggressive powers, well, you might not be able to defend yourself after somebody says that there's going to be a claim on it. And that's what happened. Teddy Roosevelt said, "I want Alaska," and Britain submitted at Canada's expense. This could happen again with Canada and Russia if Russia wants to take more claim.
And the whole rule about the rules-based order being undermined, that means there should be increasing concern around that. Right?
Sure.
International sovereignty, fairly well established in most of the cases in the Canada's north. However,
10 seconds. There we go.
international order is falling out.
Should we be sparring with swords, right?
Exactly.
So Canada, Australia, and others are not alone in feeling the bullying effects of China's foreign policy. In this case, there is an oddity to the story, as President Duterte is friendly with China, but his foreign secretary and others are questioning the cost of this relationship. But this story strikes closer to home than we think. Canada also needs to consider how larger militarized countries affect its sovereignty, and Canada is no stranger to this consideration. As mentioned, in the early 1900s, Canada lost its claim to Alaska to Britain's desire to pacify the U.S.'s aggressive actions. Now, Russia is a constant threat to our sovereignty as it relates to our northern water boundaries, especially in consideration of the Arctic's economic opportunities opening up. Both Nathaniel and I thank you for watching Our Nation Today. Remember, keep examining and know that you are part of the solution.